introduction about the speaker is Dr. Sarun Kumar Krishna, from Krishnaswamy. He's he's a well-known friend for me right from my college days at Laila College. He have graduated from same college, PG. Later he continued PG there also. Later he switched to University of Madras, where I did my PhD degree, and the Department of Physics carried out. I carried out in the Department of Chemistry, and later his PhD he switched over to SRM University, Ramapuram, as an assistant professor in 2014. He has served there for 5 years up to 2019. Further from there he is to Sri S. Ramaswamy Naidu Memorial College, Virudhunagar, as an assistant professor in the Department of Physics. As I observed right from my UP days, he is very meritorious candidate, and he is very sincere in his career. And to his credits, he has been published 19 publications in international journals, and he has been a constant speaker for various invited talks and seminars and conferences. He has expertise in various fields like high energy ball milling, preparation of powder samples, nano powder samples, solid state thin films, etc. And he is not only in physics, he also expertise networking and computer science. He is of vast knowledge, and he has been member in various bodies like Material Research Society of India. He has been in Neutron Scattering Society of India, and to his credit, he has been the gold medalist during his UT days. He has been the one of the 200 young researchers selected in international conference held at Hyderabad, and his resume runs over, and he has published various papers. And I welcome Dr. Saruna Kumar Krishnaswamy to deliver his talk, training programs on XRD, X-ray diffraction technique.
Good morning to all of you. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to give my views on X-ray diffraction technique. I thank my friend Dr. B. Prabhu, ECH, Guindy Campus Coordinator, who gave me this opportunity to present my topic here. So today we are going to discuss one of the important techniques in materials characterization series. Here X-ray diffraction technique I am going to discuss. Now, why this technique is important and how we are going to start, we are going to discuss it today. So this X-ray diffraction techniques form the basis of many material science research, or almost all, because crystalline materials form most of the crystalline materials find its application in most of the applications. So in that way, this X-ray diffraction will tell you about the structure of the crystalline material. So in that way, the topics to be covered today is some of the basics of X-ray diffraction and some concepts regarding to the important terms and views, then a complete picture how it is done, why it is done, then some practical aspects we should take care while taking this X-ray diffraction, then finally how to take up this data and use it for your thing. So I am going to give all the introduction part today, because within this time given I can give you an introduction to everything regarding X-ray diffraction. So before going into our topic, so we will see what is X-ray crystallography as defined by Wikipedia. So here what we are going to see is X-ray crystallography is nothing but experimental science in determining the atomic and molecular structure of a crystal. So to find the molecular and atomic structure, we should use a X-ray beam which is diffracted by this material. So when it is diffracted in a particular angle and with particular intensity, these diffracted beams carry the information about three-dimensional picture of the crystal. So this is what we are going to see, that is using X-rays we are going to do diffraction, then talk about the atomic and molecular structure. After knowing the structure, what we are going to do is we are going to define the mean positions of the atoms in the structure, so that we can talk about various properties like chemical bonds, disorder. There are many other physical properties. So depending on the structure, that is how the atoms are placed, where the atoms are placed, and what atoms are placed in the structure, we will give the properties of the material. So this is a small introduction. So before going into the topic, I will tell you 3 different books which are like Bible. We can use it for our reference anytime for learning. So X-ray diffraction by D.D. Cullity, X-ray diffraction by polycrystalline materials, and the third book is Fundamentals of Powder Diffraction and Structural Characterization of Materials. So my favorite book is the second one, that is X-ray diffraction, and today's talk, everything is based on this book only. I think we can buy this book for our reference purpose, which will be with us. So if you are a material scientist, I suggest this book to be with your library all the time, so that quick reference can be made with respect to this. So today's talk, everything is based on this book only, and some aspects have been taken from this book. So books form a good reference for reading and learning. So regarding X-ray diffraction, where to start this journey? So my suggestion will be to know a small thing about the instrument, which will help go through the theory, then finally we will go for the analysis part. So this will be a X-ray diffractometer. I think the next session will be on the practical aspects of this. Virtual session will be held on this. So I am not going to the full detailed part. What we know we will take from this place and move on. So here you can see on the left hand side we have a X-ray source which contains a Coolidge tube. So it will produce X-rays which is falling on the sample stage. We are going to place the samples on the stage, and when the X-rays are falling on this sample, they will get diffracted, and this right hand side we have a X-ray detector. So this detector will detect the diffracted beams, their intensity, and we are going to get the X-ray diffractogram. That is 2 theta values in x-axis, y-axis will contain intensity values. So this is like a time lapse photograph where you can see from the bottom the detector has the source has moved from the bottom to this position. Similarly, detector has also moved simultaneously. So what is this? We will see later, but this is the basics we should know. So in an instrument, X-ray diffractometer, we have an X-ray source, we have a sample stage or sample holder, and after that we have an X-ray detector. So these 3 we should know to analyze what we are going to do with X-ray diffraction. So this is what we are going to know. So we should know a basic of instrumentation to understand the X-ray diffraction. So I am going to tell you about 3 important components: X-ray source, sample holder, X-ray detector. So as we discuss these things, you will know the importance of these 3 basically. There are many other components available, but still these 3 holds important in terms of theory and analysis. So when you have a closer look about the X-ray source, then regarding sample stage and the thing, detector, why it is important? The question is coming out, why we should know these 3 things? Because the first, X-ray source will tell you what type of wavelength you are going to use, how much intensity is coming out of it, what is the voltage given. That determines every aspect of X-ray produced. This X-ray only determines what type of sample you are going to analyze, because we have various wavelengths we are going to discuss later. Next, the sample stage, where you are going to mount the sample through which the diffraction has to take place. So this important thing, because most of the analysis is going wrong based on the placement of the sample only. So we should be very careful, and we should know some properties of the sample holder. Then finally, about the X-ray detector, there are various types of detector available to detect the X-rays, but still I'm not going to tell about everything to you, but we should know these three aspects. There will be a X-ray which produces various wavelengths according to our sample, then sample holder where we are going to place the sample, and third one is X-ray detector. So here also we have position sensitive detectors, semiconductor detectors, and scintillation detectors. So all these things are available. Now I told you, right, because X-ray source is very important. You can see that before that we know how X-rays are produced. When fast moving electrons are suddenly stopped by metals, we have the effect of producing X-rays. It is like releasing the energy gained from the electrons. So in that way we have chromium, iron, cobalt, copper and molybdenum. So these all are the metals which are going to place and bombard them with electrons. So if you see this K alpha and K alpha 1, this is the primary or the wavelength which is going to be used for diffraction. So in this diffraction you can see copper. For example, if on copper we are going to incident high energy electrons, you will get a wavelength of K alpha as 1.54187 and K alpha 1 as 1.5405 and K alpha 2 as 1.5441. We should know the difference between these things, and K beta. So this is second major wavelength coming out. So in earlier days when we have for example iron in some element, we usually go for cobalt because there was fluorescence effect taking place. So depending on the samples, in earlier days we will be using cobalt, chromium, different type of wavelengths. Now commonly available thing wavelength is copper K alpha, that is generally we will be writing as 1.5406, the average of this one, that is 1.5406. How we can average this out? According to this diagram, you can understand that this is the major intensity of X-rays coming out when you do stopping of fast moving electrons using those anodes. So K alpha 1, K alpha 2, K beta. So K beta is not required, so that will interfere with your data. So we will remove that. How to remove? You see this column called filter is coming out. For example, for copper, nickel is the filter, that is next element. When you have next element, nickel placed in front of copper, the X-rays coming out will be stripped off with K beta. So K beta will not come out. Still we have K alpha 1 and K alpha 2. So here we should be very careful. Few instruments gives directly K alpha only, that is it is an average. Then few instruments directly give a ratio of K alpha 1 and K alpha 2, K alpha 1 by K alpha 2. So in that way we should be very careful with the terminology. So if we have ratio, it will be always 0.5. You can see the intensity is K alpha 1 by K alpha 2 is half the intensity, so it is 0.5. K beta will be removed. How to remove this? Nickel filter. For cobalt, iron is the filter. So this is the way they will use filters. So what is the job of filter? They will remove the K beta. Next, coming to the sample holder, you can see there are variety of sample holders. Why? Because we have variety of samples. So according to the sample, we should able to select and place your sample holders. For example, if you have 5 grams of powder, you can take a very large container where you can fill all the samples, because it is not destroying the sample. So XRD is one of the non-destructive techniques. So the sample will not be destroyed. So in that way we can place in the entire sample for X-ray diffraction. So next thing will be thin films. So accordingly, thin film, you can see this holder where we can place the thin films. Then we have pellet. Pellet can be ranging from a small one to a big one. So if you have sputtering targets, it will be 12 mm pellets. So it will be a very big one. You have small pellets also. So in inches also some pellets are available. So in that way, depending on the type of sample, you can place the holders. So accordingly, if you have only 1 gram or 2 gram of powder, then also you can do the X-ray diffraction, but accordingly the sample holder has to be chosen. So in that way you have to get the optimized sample holder for your sample X-ray diffraction. If you know about these things, we'll go to the next one. So we have seen a very small introduction to instrumentation, which is required for our XRD theory basics. So if we have a small knowledge on that, we can go proceed to this XRD theory basics. So what we are going to see here is a concept tree. So here I have X-rays. These X-rays are falling on the atoms or molecules arranged. So that we have a diffraction taking place. When we have diffraction taking place, we have to deal with all these keywords, or we can say important terms. What are these important terms? First, these atoms, they are arranged in two-dimensional way, we call it as plane. When all the three dimensions are considered, these planes constitute a three-dimensional arrangement of planes. Then they are coming under the category of space group. When you have space group, we have to talk about Bravais lattices, that is cubic structure to triclinic structure. Then if you want to talk about Bravais lattices, we should know about symmetry, that is cubic cells will have high symmetry than triclinic Bravais lattice. Now when we know all these terms, we should know about unit cell, that is minimum structure which can be formed using the given atoms. So when you know unit cell, we can go to the diffraction part, which will be defined by your Bragg's law, which is 2d sin theta is equal to n lambda. When you know these things, that 2d, that is a d spacing, if you know what is n, that is first order diffraction. If you take, if you know the lambda wavelength of X-ray, we can calculate the theta, or if you know the theta value, we can calculate the d spacing. So in that way, if you know the Bragg's law, I can talk about theta and d spacing. If you know these things, I can talk about Bragg positions. What is Bragg position? If you have 2 theta versus intensity graph, what will be the peak position in 2 theta value? So that gives Bragg position. So we will go to discuss about these things. So how these things are coming out, it is due to the atomic positions. So atomic position in 3D space will give rise to all these parameters. If you know all these things, we can talk about crystal structure. If it is a crystalline compound, crystal structure and its properties, then we can calculate again stress and strain. If you know everything, we can talk about nanomaterials. For example, nanomaterials are strained materials because decrease in surface to volume ratio, we have a small decrease in the volume, so there will be a lot of stress and strain, which gives rise to a different properties. So in that way, if you know all these keywords, I can say it is keywords, then you can understand about X-ray diffraction. Many will be wondering so much terms, but everything is from the basics we are talking, not any advanced level, it is all basic level. We should know about X-ray diffraction. So this is what I call it as concept tree. If you are going to master this tree, the fruit from the tree will be very useful. That is, the fruit will be is that you will be getting the structure of the material. I think this is the keyword here, structure of the material. If you know the structure of the material, I can talk about the properties of the material. I can talk about properties from the structure. For example, physical properties like structural, magnetic, optical and electrical. These properties are dependent on structure, how the atoms are placed. So this placement of atoms is determined using X-ray diffraction. So similar, there is a neutron diffraction also, that is a more advanced concept. Now we are talking only about X-ray diffraction. In that way, for example, I can tell you about magnetic property. Magnetic property requires higher symmetry. For example, cubic structure, many of the magnetic materials will be having cubic structure. If you go and read about that, you will see that it is having cubic structure. If you want antiferromagnetic property, then also a symmetrical space is required for the placement of the atoms. Electrical, there should be absence of symmetry. There should be absence of symmetry. It is diagonally opposite. Magnetic materials will require symmetric structure. Electrical properties will require non-symmetrical, that is deviation from symmetry should be there. So this is the way the structure will determine the optical properties or electrical or magnetic properties. So when the atoms and molecules are in spatial arrangement, that forms the basis for diffraction. So we call that material as crystalline because they have specific positions in space. The atoms or molecules will have specific position in space, so that will form the plane and three-dimensional space, so that when you pass X-rays to them, diffraction will take place. Now I will take example of cubic structure. So this is a simple arrangement of atoms at the corner of the cube, so that it will be shared by different unit cells. So I have shown you only one unit cell. In this cubic structure itself, we have simple cubic, body centered cube and face centered cubic cell, which will be having different type of placements of atoms. Now you should know why I am talking about placement of atoms. So you have to imagine that there are no lines or there are no unit cells. It is all our imagination, so that we are going to define some properties. So in that way, if you know about this arrangement of atoms in cubic structure, I can talk about planes. Okay, I am not specifying any axis here because all the three axes are same, because for a unit cell A, B and C parameters are important. Here all the three are different. All the three are same here. For example, if you take 0, 0, 1, I can say this is to be Z axis, the plane which is existing in Z axis. If I say 1, 0, 0, the plane is related to X axis. If 0, 1, 0, I am talking about Y axis. So we have three different axes, that is Z, X and Y. For a cubic system, all the three are same. So if a diffraction is going to take place, then all the three will contribute to one common peak. So this is about cubic structure. If I can talk about tetragonal structure, we talk about tetragonal, you can see A will be equal to B but will not be equal to C. For example, Z axis will be a different one. So in that, now two different peaks will come, because 1, 0, 0 and 0, 1, 0, they are equivalent, but 0, 0, 1 is different. So there will be now two peaks, one arising from 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, together they will give one peak, and regarding 0, 0, 1 there will be second peaks. In this way, when you are going away from symmetry, number of peaks also will increase. You should be very careful in noting down this particular aspect. As we are moving away from symmetry, number of peaks obtained in XRD spectrum will be increasing. So this is the way we are going to analyze the peaks which are arising from planes. So in this way, cubic structure has very less number of peaks due to this equivalency of planes. So when you have a plane, I will consider two planes with a spacing of d, which is called as d spacing between two planes. Now if we have a diffraction taking place, then Bragg's law says that 2d sin theta is equal to n lambda should be satisfied. So if I take n to be 1, 2d is d spacing between the two planes of atoms arranged in three-dimensional space. So in that way we have theta, which is nothing but the diffraction angle. Then lambda, if you know about the X-ray diffraction source, then I can calculate d. If you know theta, I can calculate d. If you know d, I can calculate the theta. So it is vice versa. I can produce a structure from the values of d values, or I can produce the d values from the knowledge of sin theta. So the unknown variable will be theta and d, one at a time. So we should have the knowledge of lambda. So this is what we give to our MSc students, where they will calculate the d spacing, where they have we are calculating the d spacing from the set of theta values given. So if you know about this Bragg's diffraction, we should know about Bravais lattices, where you can see cubic has three different structure. cubic, simple cubic, body centered and face centered. From that, if you go above the pyramid, you can see triclinic, it is very low symmetry. It is having very low symmetry. So this talks about now 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional shifting, where the atoms are now considered in 3-dimensional place, and we are calling them as Bravais lattices, and there are different type of Bravais lattices. If you know this particular aspect, I can talk about space group. Now what is space group? I'll tell you a website. You can go to Google. In the Google, if you are going to hypertext space group, if you type this, you can see the first search itself is a very important one, hypertext book of crystallographic space group diagrams. You can see here, you can take any of the links. I'll take this high resolution. You can see here now. Triclinic is the top, number 1, and last cubic 230. So now this gives a very important thing which is called as space group, where these space groups will define how the atoms are positioned in a structure. So it defines the place and rules using symmetry operations and translational operators. So you can see 230 space groups are there. Each number is having a particular keyword. This is space group notation. If you click on that, you can see what is the operations are all performed. These are all related to, these symbols are related to different operations, how they are going to produce atoms in the unit cell. So this is the, you can say, primary rule which will define how the structure is produced. For example, for cubic itself, we are having so many numbers of space group because it is just a cubic system, one of the Bravais lattice system. So in that way, we have so many numbers. If according to this, there will be placement of atoms. This placement is defined by the symmetry operators and position generators. So space group will give you all the rules and regulations. Coming back to the presentation. So when you know space group, I can have the complete structure in my hand. So I can know what is the atom, where it is placed, and every detail I can know. Now, if you know the basics of some instrumentation and all the aspects I have introduced till now, from planes to space group, I can talk about now the diffractogram. I can talk about diffractogram. What is diffractogram? It is nothing but the 2 theta value. 2 theta versus intensity graph which I am going to produce. So how to analyze, how to do that, we are going to enter. So what we have till now, we will have small recap. In the instrument part, we know about X-ray source, X-ray wavelength, what are the filters used, sample holder and their types, and X-ray detector. So this is the knowledge we have. Now when going to theory, we have a plane. From that, diffraction is taking place, then it gives rise to Bragg's law. Then we are moving to 3-dimensional Bravais lattices and space group, which give the rules for arranging these atoms. Then we can talk about the structure. Then unit cell, how one small unit can be produced using these rules and regulations. Then we know about the atomic positions. So I am not given these things in a particular order, but we should have a knowledge of these things so that we can proceed. This is what we have seen until now. Nowadays, we have a lot of X-ray diffractometers available in every institute. So, people have access to XRD instruments on payment basis or personal basis also. But how effectively we are using these diffractometers for our research? That is a question mark, because we should have some factors and understandings about these diffractometers and how we are going to get the data out of it. If you don't know, then whatever meaning you are bringing out of these X-ray diffractograms for writing your research article or presenting your research will be doubtful. That is, how impactful it will be, the analysis is dependent on the way you are going to consider the properties. So here we should know first aspect is how we are going to move your detector, tube and sample. There are three aspects, so we call it as geometry. The way the X-ray tube, the X-ray detector and the sample is going to move for analyzing or getting your diffraction pattern is called as geometry. Here every diffractometer which we are using now is using Bragg-Brentano geometry. So what is this Bragg-Brentano geometry? Here we are going to consider tube, X-ray tube, sample and detector. If we are going to consider theta scan, if you are going to consider theta scan, what we are going to do is tube remains constant, sample and detector will rotate in a particular speed, both in tandem will rotate in a particular speed, so that you will get a diffractogram like 2 theta in x-axis, in y-axis intensity will come. So this is one scan. The second scan will be theta to theta scan, where sample is static, tube and the detector, X-ray source tube and detector will move in tandem. So these two different scan parameters are there. So most probably we will use theta scan. Sometimes theta to theta scan also is possible. So this is the knowledge we should have. So Bragg-Brentano geometry is first keyword. The second one is placement of sample. If you have the sample holder which is empty, now I am going to fill the sample. So what effect it will have? You can see that the center one which is correctly filled up to the level. If you are not leveling the sample, what will happen is, instead of pointing at theta, if this is the correct filled sample, the X-ray will come and fall on the sample and get diffracted, that is the red line will reach the correct theta value. But if you are under filling the sample, that is you are not filling up to the mark, so what will happen is, instead of reaching theta, it will reach theta minus some d theta, that is exactly theta it will not reach, it will reach a value below that or above that. Same thing will happen with overfilling of the sample. You can see instead of reaching theta, it will go other to some other plus or minus d theta. So your shifting in peaks will take place. And if you are doing some doping studies, what will happen is, you will claim that this to be due to doping. The shifting in 2 theta values is not due to doping here. You can understand it's not due to, it is due to filling of sample. If your X-ray operator is following all these precautions, then your data is safe to analyze. So you must have understood why we should be having some knowledge on these things, because most of you are paying and getting the data. Instrument will be operated by someone. So how they are going to fill this? It is a question mark. Then finally, how you are going to analyze? It is in your hands now. So any shift in the 2 theta value should be taken scientifically. So this is one of the effects which is producing your shift. Now if you are using thin film, if you are taking data for thin film, it is better advised to take grazing incidence mode. What is grazing incidence mode? The particular X-ray source will remain in a less than 5 degree angle. It will remain static. You can see that X-rays, the red line will fall through your sample. That pink magenta color is your sample and the bottom one is your substrate. So X-rays will pass through the surface of the sample, get diffracted and it will be detected by your detector. So in this mode, if you are going to take your X-ray diffraction data, then what will happen is, the good chance of diffraction from your sample will take place, not from the substrate. So to avoid substrate effect on your sample, this grazing incidence mode is important. Sometimes it is called a GI mode. Technically it is called GI mode. So if next time you are going to take, please inquire about this mode and take for your thin film sample. This is another example of a precaution, how to take your X-ray data. Then next, what you should be worried about is step size and step time. So what is this? Next time you get any data, open that file, that is UXD or many formats are available according to the instrument. Open that in the notepad. You will see lot of text before your data, that is intensity and 2 theta values. There will be lot of text. In that text you can go and see step size. What is this step size? For each step, what is the interval? It is very, very important. It plays a major role in statistics of your sample. For example, between 20 degree and 21 degree, if you are using this step size 0.04, how many data points are available? We can calculate now. So it is 20 to 21 divided by 0.04, you will get a number. So that number will be for 1 degree. Then you can multiply it for 20 to 60 degrees. That is, people will take from 20 degrees to 60. Then you can multiply by 40. That's all. So this is the way number of points is increasing. If you are going to reduce this, what will happen? For example, if you are getting 1000 points with this step size, what will happen if you reduce this to 0.02? Here also you can see a different step size. It is 0.04. If I take this step size and reduce it to half, 0.02, then the number of points obtained in your data will be 2000. For step size 0.04 it is 1000, then for 0.02 it is 2000. So in this way you can improve the statistics. What I mean by statistics is smoothness of the curve, validity of the data, so everything will improve. Similarly, if you have time, that is 1 second. If I increase to 2 seconds, what will happen? Detector will remain in a step for 2 seconds. So if 2 seconds is there, then you can imagine a proper data is obtained. A very good intensity data is obtained at that particular step. But there is a catch point here. If you are going to decrease the steps, then time period for obtaining your data is increased. If half an hour you are getting the data, if you are decreasing the step size by 2, then what will happen? You will get data in 1 hour. Similarly, if you are increasing time by 2 seconds, again the double time will take. The time will take to be, for example, half an hour is for 1 second. This is 1 second in one step. Then what will happen? It will be doubled. So why we are talking about this? If you are going for any detailed analysis of your structure, you require better statistics. So what I mean by statistics is good data. So in that way you can obtain by using 0.02 or increasing the time. But most of the time the latest instruments, they have been optimized for these values, that is 0.04 and 1 second. When you have these values, that itself will give you a very good data for analysis purpose. So modern instruments have been optimized. So better, if you want specifically for obtaining a good analysis, you can go for changing this, or you can use this normal timing and step size for your data getting. So in that way, step size and step time is a very important point. So we should be knowing these things. Another important aspect will be the wavelength. So here you can see the wavelength 1.7889. I think it belongs to cobalt target, not molybdenum, cobalt target. They have issued only 1 K alpha. But in another data what I have seen is, you can see wavelength 1 is 1.5406, wavelength 2 is 1.5439 and wavelength 3. You can see that wavelength 1 and 2 is K alpha 1 and K alpha 2. The ratio they have given is 0.5. The third wavelength is K beta, which has been filtered. So in this way, few instruments will give out a data of a ratio. Wavelength 1 and wavelength 2 ratio will be given. You have to use this ratio for your analysis. So we should be very careful with using these values for obtaining your data output after analyzing your sample. Next is, if you are doing any analysis, you are creating theoretical peaks for your experimental peaks, then what function you should select, that also is a problem. Many are proceeding with Laurentian peak. Many are proceeding with Laurentian peak function for producing a theoretical pattern for experimental pattern. Fitting, we can call it as peak fitting. But now there are problems because Laurentian peaks are most suited, but some peaks are getting with Gaussian. So now we have a solution here. We have void function. This is called void function, which has partly Laurentian, partly Gaussian. For example, if I take eta to be 0, what will happen is this becomes completely Gaussian. If I take eta to be 1, what will happen? G is lost, we have completely Laurentian. So void function is nothing but a combination of Gaussian and Laurentian. So any value in between these two, eta can be from 0 to 1. In between means there will be a combination of Gaussian function and Laurentian function. Since the void function is not able to be produced computationally, what we have used is pseudo void function. Completely through computational, void function is not generatable. So what they are using is pseudo void function. If you use this particular function, it will be better fitting with your asymmetrical peaks, where the peaks will not be having a same slope. We will see that. So if you have all these idea about sample filling, wavelength, then about this particular peak value functions, what we are going to do is, we should have these primary things into account. That is collecting data points. I told you about statistics, right? This is a statistics. Then collection of data, mostly 10 to 70 is enough. Most of the crystalline samples will require 10 to 70. In special cases, you can take up to 10 to 90. Less than 10, greater than 90, there will be lot of effects coming into picture due to instrument. So those will contribute to your particular diffractogram. So better, the standard thing will be 10 to 90. If you are not getting any peaks greater than 60 or 70, you can stop with 70 itself. So what I do usually is, I will take from 10 to 70. If it is not satisfied, I can go for 10 to 90. So better you limit 10 to 70. That will be enough, and that also is very good data. If you want, according to samples it will vary, but standard you can take from 10 to 70. Then good practices in collection of data. Now only I told you, right? Placement of sample, filling of sample, what wavelength you are going to use. If you are using thin films, you can talk about grazing incidents. So all those things will come into picture. Then definitely enough sample for data collection. Enough sample means if you have 1 gram also you can get the data, but I told you have to use special holders. So accordingly you have to select and use the holders. And degree of crystallinity, it is very, very important. If you are going to have a doubt that your sample is having amorphous nature, you should be very careful with analyzing your sample. If degree of crystallinity is less, you should be very careful in analyzing. So this also is a very important parameter. Then I talked about good statistics, right? Now you can see I am giving you a graph. Now wherever I go and ask a question like can you find some peaks? Yes, people will tell about around 40, 39 or between 30 and 40. Between 30 degrees and 40 degrees there are a lot of peaks, but according to my suggestion they are not peaks, they are spikes. Spikes means random placement of data points. It is due to the, I can say 2 or 3 parameters. Main parameter is here the particular sample is almost amorphous, that is the degree of crystallinity is very, very less. That is my point of view. So you should be very careful with analyzing these type of samples. So I am giving this an example of very poor statistics for analyzing your data. So I think this is a amorphous, closely amorphous sample or less degree of crystallinity sample. This is a better, I will not say good, a better. Why better? You can see different peaks are shown correctly, or you can distinguish between peaks and backgrounds. So what is background? I'll go back to the slide here. You can see these small things which are coming out. If you don't keep your sample also, you will get this small line. It is called background radiation. So the background will be always present if your sample is there or not. You can take empty holders, then also you will get this small background. So that is what here I am telling you. The background is less and your peaks are distinguishable. Then it is a data with better statistics. Data with better statistics. Now we are going to go for data with good statistics. You can see good statistics means even smallest peak also is almost visible. The 100% peak, whatever it is, 100% peak, it is very clear, and we can see a large difference in the values between the highest peak and the background values. But still, if you zoom in, you can see small peaks also are available. So I can give an example like a good statistic, not better, it is like a good statistics. So if you are able to distinguish your diffractogram, 2 theta values versus intensity graph like this, you can go for better analysis. You should have some knowledge on these things. So you should now be able to understand what is a poor statistics, a better statistics, and a good statistics. When you have a good statistics, I can go for next. As the senior suggested, it is nothing but signal to noise ratio. One term you can say the highest thing is 4000 here, the lowest thing is less than 100 here. You can have a ratio on that, we will have a very big number. 4000 divided by 100 will give you 400. So I am talking about highest peak value and the lowest background value. 4000 by 100 will give you 400. The same thing, if you have a number here, you can calculate. But here you cannot do that. You can see 50 and 200. If you divide, you will get only 4. There was 400. Here it is 4. So what will happen is, depending on the signal to noise ratio, we can say this is a good statistics or not. If you have a good data, what should I do? You can go for analysis and interpretation of your XRD data. So for analysis and interpretation, all the previous things we have discussed, you should be aware of. So we will get a good knowledge or good output of what your analysis can be done. Now, before proceeding, we will have a small session now. I will give you some diffraction peaks. Can you identify what is the system? Because we have talked this as a clue in the starting of the session. That is, from the number of peaks available in the diffractogram, I can say what system it is. Now I told you most of the data is enough between 20 to 80. If 20 to 80 there are only 2 peaks, what system it can be? You can see it is cubic system, because when you have cubic system, all the equivalent planes are producing 1 peak only. So the number of peaks gets reduced. So just by seeing what is the number of peaks in your diffractogram, I can say about what is the Bravais lattice it belongs to. It is a rough guess, but it will be a good guess. You can see here number of peaks. So based on this guidelines, you can just say that what system your sample can belong to by seeing number of peaks. Then the next step we have to analyze deeply. For that, these are the primary factors. This book I have used, Fundamentals of Powder Diffraction and Structural Characterization of Materials. The table is taken from there. It is a very good table and very informative table. You should keep always in mind. So peak position is always determined by ABC, that is position of the atoms. Then peak intensity is determined by what type of atom is present. A very good guess here. Why? Because if atom size is bigger, what will happen? More electrons are there, more possibility of diffraction will take place. So you can see less than oxygen and all we cannot detect using X-ray diffraction, because that the diffraction strength is not there. The diffraction strength is not there. So in that way, x, y, z position parameters will give you the peak intensity. Then what about peak shape? Here only all the nano people working, we should be very careful. Peak shape determines your grain size, strain and stress. Very, very important, because sometimes the broadening, that is peak shape, will take in the word called broadening, peak broadening. Whenever people are getting a broadened peak, they will say my sample is nano. Please be careful, that can be due to instrument also. That we are going to see in the next slide. But here I am telling you this table because from the table, the graph itself, we can analyze many parameters, like what is the degree of crystallinity of the sample. I can see about peak intensity. Then what about peak shape? It is not a very good shape, but it is distorted slightly. Then I can call it as a very smaller sized, grain sized or particle sized sample. So in that way there will be stress in the system. So it is producing not a very good peaks. It is due to disorders in the system. So you can see lot of information can be derived from X-ray diffraction itself. So peak position will give you the unit cell, then peak intensity will give you the atomic parameters where the atoms are placed, that will determine your peak intensity, and the last one will be peak shape. So that determines what type of order is existing in your material. So instrumental factors, now I told you, right, not only sample but also instrument also contributes. For example, X-ray source, slit, spectral width, axial divergence, transparency of the sample, all these are very important terms. I am not going to explain these things. I gave you the book, you can refer there, but my point is these things will contribute. That is what we are defining as instrumental resolution function. So what the instrument operators will do is they will run a standard sample, for example copper, aluminum oxide or some similar standard samples will be there. If they are running these standard samples, you will get a standard peak width, that is your full width half maximum. If any change is happening to that, instrument will be adjusted for your standard sample. Then only if your sample is nano, your broadened peak is related to your nano material. Otherwise, the broadening is happening due to instrument. Please be careful with these aspects. Example. So your instrument also will contribute to your data. So you should be very careful with that. Not always the sample is going to contribute. So now instrument resolution function, it will vary with all the instruments, and the operator, they have to run the sample data, that is standard data given with the instrument, and calibrate the instrument, and also they have to calibrate that particular broadening, instrumental broadening. So that will be contributing to your sample also. So better you have to negate that instrumental broadening and talk about your sample broadening, which may be due to your nano sized sample. Another risk I told you, right, if you go below 10 degree, what happens is your peak is not symmetric. You can see, if you cut this peak into half, what happens is the left hand side is not symmetrical with the right hand side. The blow up, that is your inset, you can see here, left hand side peak is not symmetrical with your right hand peak. So these problems arise when you go beyond 2 theta 10 degree, below that. So that is why I told you restrict from 10 to 90. At higher angles also this peak asymmetry will arise. So the better thing will be doing is 10 to 80 or 70 is enough for limiting for normal samples. If you want, you are specifically wanting that, go for the lower order peaks, that is less than 10 degrees. Now when you have a diffractogram, we have to fit the peaks. Fit means I have to take a profile function, theoretically generate a peak for that experimental function and derive a 2 theta value. If I get the 2 theta value, as I told you, 2d sin theta is equal to n lambda, n is equal to 1. So what we are going to do is, lambda we know, theta we know, we can find d spacing. So this is the way we are going to proceed for everything. For cubic you can calculate with your hand, but when you go to tetragonal and other higher resistance, you need a computer or computational system. You can see here we have 3 peaks. All the 3 peaks are generated separately using a function, Lorentzian function, Gaussian function or pseudo-wide function. Older programs will give you Lorentzian function. You can 3 different peaks can be generated and 2 theta values are calculated from that. From the 2 theta values you can correlate and bring about the value of your ABC. From that we can find the structure. We can find the structure of the material from that. This is the way we are going to proceed for peak by peak fitting. So by the way, why we are going to fit? To determine the structure of the material. So we have entered the space for analyzing the sample. So if you know the method, peak by peak fitting, 10 peaks are there, 10 different profile functions will be created and 2 theta values will be generated, and getting that 2 theta, what we are going to do is calculate your structure. For this particular peak by peak fitting, you can use XRDA software. You can note down this XRDA software in the Google. You can go and search. You can use this software XRDA for fitting using peak by peak. Then we are entering a different domain now, hole pattern fitting. Hole pattern means at a time all the peaks will be generated and they are correlated. Correlated means if one peak is shifted, all the other peaks also will be shifted. Such a fitting is called as hole pattern fitting. So the first one is fitting with cell constraints. When you take cell constraints, what will happen is, for example, I will directly move on here. If I know what is a space group, IA3D. So these are the 2 theta values possible. This can be calculated. As you know, we have a structure. We have a specific position for atoms. If you know, we can have the planes. If you know the planes, I can calculate what is the peak value for the planes, because 2D sin theta is equal to n lambda. So that is the basic thing here. So in that way I can produce the space group. But you see the difference. The first graph shows all the peaks for space group. But when I come to specifically placing atoms, Y3Al5O12, yttrium, aluminum, garnet. When I place yttrium, aluminum, oxygen, you can see the peak's intensity is different. Now you have to remember that table where peak positions were determined by ABC values. Now peak intensity is decided by position of atoms. So you can see yttrium, aluminum, oxygen, when they are placed in specific places for the same space group, the peaks are different. Then what about space group for Lu3, lutetium, iron, garnet? You can see the intensities are always different because the atoms are different. So you should be very careful with the analyzing the sample. So this is another example. This is an example for profile fitting. So all these peaks are correlated. So with the ABC value I can produce the entire spectrum. Then comes Rietveld method. So Rietveld method is a different aspect where they have used only ABC values there. Now we are going to use integrated intensity values, and because it is dependent on scattering factor of the atoms. So when you have to include every aspect of your sample, then you will go for Rietveld refinement. So Rietveld refinement is nothing but minimizing the difference between your calculated pattern and difference pattern. So these concepts I am giving you the introduction. You please go through the book, you will understand more, because this is a very time consuming process. You have to understand, then we can proceed very fastly. So what is Rietveld refinement? We are going to produce calculated pattern, match with observed pattern, then give a theoretical and experimental explanation for that. So how it is done? For each point, so here each point we have R value. R value you can see intensity observed minus intensity calculated, the whole square, and again intensity observed power 0.5. So this is one type of residual factor. We call this as residual factor. So in this way R values can be calculated. Again RWP, here weighted average is there, W is equal to 1 by I. So this W will be equal to 1 by I. So again just R, but here it is weighed points. Every point will be given a weight. So you can see W is equal to 1 by I. So when you have high intensity also they will have a specific value. When they have low intensity also they will have a specific value. So both the peaks are considered for RWP. Then this is R expected error. So R is expected, REXP is nothing but expected error. So N will be number of points and P will be number of parameters modified. So in that way you will get REXP. So all the three values when they are in the range of 1 to 10, the values of R, RWP, REXP, your analysis is good. When the values are between 1 to 10% or 10, the values are between 1 to 10. So in that way it is a very good fit. Now we have come to a stage where we are going to see what are the parameters which we have derived. Until now I have told you I can get the unit cell parameters A, B, C I can calculate. Then I can know what type of Bravais lattice, that is cubic, tetragonal, rhombohedral, whatever it is we can find. Then space group, what is the space group we are going to know. Then if you know the space group, position of atoms can be done. Then structure of unit cell can be known. Then bond angle, bond distance and stress and strain. All these things I can know from my X-ray diffraction analysis. When I can do all the things, I can say magnetism. Example I am telling you. As I told you, when you know all these parameters, I can know about the properties. Two examples I am going to discuss now. One is antiferromagnetism. Symmetry defines antiferromagnetism. As I told you, we have a cubic cell, we have corner atoms. All the corner atoms are magnetic. These magnetic atoms will have a magnetic moment pointing in a particular direction. So when you have this cubic environment only, then this structure is confirmed only, I can talk about magnetism. Now if I take minus to be downspin, when I take this plus to be upspin, then you can see different type of antiferromagnetic magnetism is coming out. That is type A, type C, type E and type G. So how it is derived? How the upspin and downspin is placed in the structure of the material. That is upspin and downspin is related to magnetic moments of magnetic ions. So that is what is done here. So this is one example where magnetism is derived or obtained using structure. Similarly, deviation from symmetry will give rise to ferroelectricity. You can see here. This is again a body centered cube where the titanium should be at the center, body centered position, but it is moved away. It is moved away from the small deviation is present. So in that way we are giving rise to electricity because the amount of oxygen present near the titanium ion is more than your bottom part. So in that way 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are near the titanium and another part is away. So we will have an electrical disturbance. So it will give rise to dipole moment. So this will give rise to ferroelectricity. So we are moving away from symmetry. So magnetism required symmetry, electricity required moving away from symmetry. So when you have all these things into discussion, you should know the structure of the material. That is possible using X-ray diffraction. So these are the resources which I have used for giving you this introduction about X-ray diffraction. Then before concluding, I will give you two small examples. So I will take just 2 minutes here. You can see this is the structure of barium titanate. This is structure of barium titanate. How does this program? By the way, this program is nothing but, you can note down this free software Vesta. visualization for electronics and structural analysis. For this program, I have given the input like you can see here what is the chemical formula, what is the space group number and space group name, then A, B, C, alpha, beta, gamma. You should remember the table. There we have specified this. Then I have given about the X, Y, Z position of the atoms, barium, titanium, oxygen. If you give this basic information, the number of atoms, what position they should be, all they are calculated using this set of parameters, that is space group, then ABC value, alpha, beta, gamma value, then barium, titanium, oxygen position parameters. If you feed everything to this program, it will generate automatically and give you this structure, right? You can see that when I told you about this particular, you can see titanium was at the center. You can see titanium was at the center and barium was all at the corner. Now in this structure you can see barium at the center. It is all the way we are going to define. That is what I told you, imagination, because imagination is more important. Now what I am going to do is, I will edit this data. When I edit this data, I will interchange these two atoms, titanium, titanium. This becomes barium, this becomes barium. You can see my cell structure itself has changed. That is, I have now titanium at the center, that is 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Body centered position is titanium. All these 0, 0, 0, that is 0, 1, and all the 3 axes, barium atoms have come. So this is the way we have to imagine and understand our material. This is the body centered system, barium titanate. Like we have softwares and tools to imagine and create this visualization and understand the materials. This is one aspect. Another aspect I want to tell you is, so here this is the way we are going to determine the X-ray diffraction. You can see we have a theoretical lines, that is black line. The red dots are experimental points. So you can see I am going to match the theoretical lines with experimental lines, that is red one, and these are green lines are Bragg positions. As I told you in the introduction of the talk, Bragg positions which defines 2 theta values, and the difference between these two is given by this spike on the lines. If it is a straight line, my experimental and theoretical patterns have matched. If it is not, then what happens is spikes will come. That is, these spikes are indicating that your experimental pattern has not matched with the theoretical. So that is the way we are going to change or tweak the model theoretically and match with the experimental thing. So this will be the structure we are getting as an output. So this is the way I can analyze the thing. Finally, when I have these things, I can talk about bond angles and bond distances. From that I can talk about magnetism and other parameters. This I wanted to show as an example on how we can use this X-ray diffraction for analyzing your sample. I think I can conclude with this saying that be inspired. Imagination is more important than knowledge. So thank you and best wishes. With this I conclude my talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your neat presentation on XRD. As a chemist, we do take several XRD sample characterization, but we trouble with lot of information. Like as you said, broadening of peak means the nanoparticle. We assume it, but there are many reasons like instrumentation. It is neatly presented. The theory is very depth, and many people have commented it's very informative. And one of the participants questioned you, how can I check any metal is doped or not from XRD?
Doping of metals.
Yeah. How can I check doping of metals using XRD?
So one thing is, if your doping level is less than 5%, XRD will not reveal your data. It is very difficult to find less than 5%. If your doping is more than 5%, then I should use the word substitution, right?
Yeah.
So if substitution is done, definitely the peaks related to that metal will be appearing. So as I told you, intensity of the peaks is related to how many atoms are present in your system. So if your doping is very less, the amount of means the number of peaks and the intensity of peaks also will be very less. So if your percentage is less than 7, the chance of getting your peaks is less, but more than 5, it will be good to see your peaks.
I have my own question regarding, there is a peak appears in 22 theta.
22.
At 2 theta 20.
Okay.
Less than 30. Sometimes we don't find any reference for that to interpret. Like usually for polymers you get at lower 2 theta or what?
If you know what is the structure of your polymer and what is the space group, if the 22 is matching with your space group, definitely you can include for your analysis.
But mine is not a polymer, it is a nanoparticle. Do I get a peak like that?
Yes, I can tell you on that. You can see here.
1 second. I have to give you.
Can you see my screen, sir?
1 second. And now you press.
So you can in the particular slide here, you can see space group is there, right? So according to the space group of your material, definitely if there is a peak on 22, you can use that as your sample peak, no problem in that. If it is not allowed, then it can be due to some other reason. If your material is having a particular space group, if that space group allows that 22 peak, that 22 degree peak, then it can be included in your sample itself, not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think many are interested to chat with you in your mail. Nice questions. Thank you for the deep question.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Morning, ma'am.
I'm Dr. Pramila from Neandwar College.
Okay, ma'am.
I can take a talk. Yes, madam, raise your question.
I'm able to hear.
Can we use Debye-Scherrer formula to calculate the size of the nanoparticle? Because in most of
It is muted.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Madam, unmute your. Then you can talk.
can you hear me?
Now I able to hear, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
From the XRD data using Debye-Scherrer formula, can we calculate a nanoparticle size, sir? Is it a correct method to calculate a nanoparticle size using that
If you
data?
ask me personally, I will never suggest you to go with that particular formula for nanoparticles.
Unmute பண்ணிக்கோ.
Unmute பண்ணுமா? Now it is okay, ma'am.
Yeah. You can answer.
If you ask me personally, I will never suggest you to go with Debye-Scherrer formula for calculation of nanoparticle size, that is crystallite size. Better to avoid that. You can report that values from TEM and other imaging techniques better.
Okay.
So if you are saying also it is crystallite size, particle size or grain size, we have a very big confusion between researchers. You should know what is crystallite size, what is grain size and particle size. What you are getting it from Debye-Scherrer is, you should tell me what you are getting it from that. Crystallite size.
Only the crystallite size.
And then you are talking nanoparticle, right? It is anywhere related to your nanoparticle? That value word.
But in most of the reported like that.
Yes, ma'am. But
That's the doubt.
I am telling you, it is not. I will not suggest you to do that. You can just report. This is my value I received from that formula. That's all. You cannot compare with your nano, because your nano particle, the word itself says it is particle, but what you are getting is crystallite size only, right? So if you are having a differentiation, it is a different value. If you think crystallite size and your nanoparticle size is same,
Okay, thank you, sir.
it will be okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.